Hello and welcome to Open Forum. I'm your host, Nicole Fox. Today on the show, we're taking an in-depth look at cursing and the role it plays in our culture. Language, it's the cornerstone upon which human civilization was built. Throughout the history of humanity, it has always been spoken and written language that's made the greatest achievements possible. Without words, advanced human communications couldn't have developed. Scholars around the world agree that words in any language are powerful, including words that society agrees are bad or wrong to use in public. Yet we hear profanity and cursing so much, it seems as if few people really care about its effect on others.
Cuss, swear, curse, profanity, obscenity, expletive, blue words, dirty words, epithets, and slurs. There are almost as many words to describe cursing as there are curse words. We all know that certain words are offensive, but what makes them offensive? And why have they become seemingly more acceptable in American society? Profanity and cursing have been used in literature for many centuries. English literature scholars can point out the use of profane language as far back as the 1400s, when the English poet Geoffrey Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales. William Shakespeare is famous for using the Old English equivalent of foul language quite often to give his characters rough authenticity.
In Shakespearean times, one of the ultimate insults was to bite your thumb at someone. Obviously, it's a big scene in Romeo and Juliet when the Capulets and the Montagues are having an argument, and one person bites his thumb at the other one, and you bite your thumb at me, sir. And it's almost like giving the finger back then. It's a gesture of disrespect. It's something that you're trying to bring someone down a level, knock them down a notch. And even in Shakespearean times, obviously curse words weren't around as much. They said, he would talk with a serpent's tongue, which would mean he would, curse a lot.
In fact, the works of many great writers are peppered with profanity. Mark Twain, James Joyce, and D.H. Lawrence are notable examples. Dr. William Lutz is an emeritus professor of English at Rutgers University. He's an expert on the use of language.
My experiences in language is specifically language that is used to manipulate, deceive, control, evade. The area of doublespeak. I've written a number of books on doublespeak. I've written 17 books and a number of articles. I am also concerned with and work in the area of what is called plain language. I've worked with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, any number of corporations and others on plain language in financial disclosure.
And Dr. Lutz explains what cursing and profanity really are.
Profanity is any language that is socially unacceptable in any group. And that means that it's dependent upon the context in which it's used and the social group, the culture. For example, what you can say in England, you may not be able to say in the U.S. in ordinary social discourse. But even within the United States, what you can say in New York, there's a lot of language you can say in New York that is socially acceptable that you probably couldn't use in Seattle or Keokuk, Iowa, or someplace like that.
Seeing profane language in print is much different from hearing it in public. In the early days of movies, profanity was strictly prohibited by a government commission called the Office of Standards and Practices. Now, however, all of these words are allowed in movies. As a result, profanity and cursing are common in many films. Broadcast television and radio seem to be the last venues where the use of cursing is officially restricted. The Federal Communications Commission is a U.S. government agency that enforces the law against profane and obscene content over public airwaves.
We have competition through multiple channels of entertainment now. Cable television, the internet, podcasts, satellite radio. Where does Howard Stern go? Goes to satellite radio because the FCC won't let him do his thing on over-the-air broadcasts.
But even on television, profane words have come to be used and tolerated much more in recent years. Many words that used to be considered too offensive to use on TV have been creeping into primetime shows much more often, with seemingly little government intervention. Why is this?
Americans have become desensitized to these words, although it's still not allowed on any sort of public airwaves. I think in general people have become desensitized to it.
Dr. Lutz has a different view.
The simple answer is cable television. And there's, for this reason, cable television is not regulated in the same way as the over-the-air broadcast. So cable television was allowed to do all of this. Now, I'm running an over-the-air television station, and cable television has taken away all my viewers. I'm losing money. So I'm going to push the FCC to allow me to do more so I can compete over here. It's a matter of money. Follow the money. It'll answer a lot of things.
Even though the United States Constitution guarantees freedom of speech, there are several types of speech that are not protected.
No, if you read the cases on free speech, there are all kinds of strictures on free speech. And there's endless arguments about what constitutes protected speech. You know, and the Supreme Court has defined protected and unprotected free speech. Does business have a right to run a false and deceptive ad on television? No, of course not. They can't claim free speech for that. The Supreme Court has said so. And that's not protected speech.
Societies all over the world share a common belief that one should not use profanity in public. So why do so many people do it?
First thing that pops into your head.
If I get really angry, I might let something slip.
To make themselves look higher but it doesn't really make you look low.
Mr. O'Keefe is a teacher and a professional comedian. He describes why he uses profanity in his comedy act.
If we did a show for a late night audience and you didn't have those certain words in, they wouldn't respond the same way because they're expecting it.
They're an emotional outlet that other words just can't do.
In spite of the established standards for how one should speak in public, the use of profanity seems to be on the rise. Some propose that a general relaxation of social standards is the cause. They point out that the standards for the way we dress, the way we talk, and the way we interact with each other have changed over the years to a more casual manner. In the workplace, people dress less formally. More people call each other by first names, foregoing the formal Mrs. and Mr. titles. And our demand for good manners has all but evaporated. Carl Jaskowski gives seminars to businesses on the legal issues of profanity in the workplace.
Profanity in the professional field is one which does not provide any business value. What it does, if anything, provides in the area of discrimination, demeaning, it's disrespectful type of consideration in respect to another employee.
Some may say it's common and harmless to use mild profanity at work.
Businesses are starting to realize that, yes, individuals can look very professional, but the minute they open up their mouths, they do not sound professional. If anything, they're not very motivating, and when they speak, they're very demotivating because of their language. Some people definitely don't understand when individuals start swearing and cursing what they are meaning. Are they being attacking? So businesses have started implementing the language code of ethics policy because, hey, look, if you're going to dress nice and look professional, let our employees start sounding professional. There are many employees who may, in their personal life, communicate in a certain way. When they're at home, they may use rude, crude, and abusive language, cursing. But when they come into the work, the employer right away has to command what kind of language is acceptable. Most employees, most of us as people, we're going to be respectful and courteous when we first start with a new company, a new employer, and also people that we may consider individuals of dignity. However, as time goes on, especially in a work setting, after we pass probation, we start becoming more relaxed, and then we say, well, let's see, if I use this curse word, watch their reactions. If they don't react and they tell me not to do it, well, then I'm going to go ahead and start using more.
The use of profanity is not just a problem for adults. Many school-age children are exposed to cursing on a daily basis.
What does it mean? Do you know what it means? And he said, I don't know. I said, then why would you call? I was just angry. I said, well, but this is a bad word, you know. Oh, I hear, so what? I hear that all the time at home.
There are signs that use of profanity in the workplace has actually decreased in recent years because of anti-discrimination and sexual harassment laws. This would seem to be a positive trend until we look at the use of cursing in other parts of society. That's up next when we return on Open Forum.
Our society has shown a willingness to tolerate the use of cursing. But does it have an effect on the development of young minds?
You have to constantly call their attention to language and the use of language, not just profanity, but all language.
Middle school teacher Sunita Sinkar agrees that children should be taught the importance of the words they use.
I was in our director's office once, and a 7-year-old child walks in, and teacher calls and says that he called me a B word. So I had some free time, and the director didn't have any time, so I called him and said, "What does it mean? Do you know what it means?" And he said, "I don't know." I said, "Then why would you call?" I was just angry. I said, "Well, but this is a bad word, you know." "Oh, I hear, so what? I hear that all the time at home. You know, my grandmother says this, my mother says this." And then there was a choice for me, either to give him a lecture on why it is not this and that. And then I realized what's happening here is that for 7 years, whatever this child has learned at home, I'm going to go against all that, and then I'm going to tell him something different, and it's going to take him a while to realize that what is right. Whatever my mother said, my father said at home all the time, my grandmother said, was it right? Was it usual? Or what this teacher, a new person who is completely new to me, is telling me. So what do you think the child is going to do?
I take it as if your parents, if you see your parents doing it, then you're like, oh, it's okay, so I guess I can do it too. But it just makes you look really low.
Our children, they learn from you, they learn from what you say, they learn from what they hear. And if you say it next to children, if they will say it like, they will learn it and they will say it every time. So I don't think it's good.
Mr. O'Keefe is a teacher and a parent. He explains his view.
As a parent myself, obviously I have 5 months old. If they start cursing now, it would be incredible. But I wouldn't take my children into a situation where I know it's going to be a lot of cursing, but if it happens and they're within earshot, it's the parent's job to remind the children this is what's acceptable and this is what isn't.
Parents are rightfully concerned, and I think they should be, about the use of taboo words. Because children don't know that the words are taboo. They don't understand the concept of taboo words. And even if you say, well, these are words we don't use around other people, that's very difficult for young children to understand because all words are new to them. So that's why I think parents are correct to be concerned that A, they don't use those words because that gives approval to them, and B, that the children are never in situations where they hear other adults using them in a way that appears to be acceptable.
In perhaps the most stunning example of public use of profanity, the Vice President of the United States used the worst of all English curse words. Not only did he direct this offensive language toward a U.S. senator, he did it in the place considered to be one of the most civil and formal venues in the world, the floor of the United States Senate.
It says that there's somebody with a lack of a sense of decorum and propriety, because if you are articulate, you should be able to express the same emotions, feelings, and ideas in socially acceptable language. But I think I heard an interesting reaction. I used to when I taught film, and I would usually ask my students on a Monday if they went to the movies over the weekend and what they saw and what they thought of the films. And it is interesting a number of times that students said they saw this movie and it was okay and it was pretty good, but they said every other word they were using obscenities, and their response was, it didn't fit the movie. Why are they doing this?
But using curse words has a physiological component to it that most people are unaware of. Studies have shown that the part of the brain that processes speech is not the same part that controls the use of profanity. Experiments indicate that cursing comes from a part of the brain that regulates emotion, specifically strong emotional responses. But does that relieve a person from the responsibility to control their impulse to swear?
What do you think about people who use profanity in public?
I don't think it's too cool.
Why?
Yeah. Well, I guess if there's kids around.
I don't like to hear it.
I don't like it. I think it's not polite.
Dr. Lutz maintains that the use of profanity is strong emotional release.
So what it's really expressing is emotions. They're an emotional outlet that other words just can't do. When we say, I'm at a loss for words, and it's at exactly that point that we'll turn to profanity if we want to keep going.
But is that impulse instinctual or is it learned?
As far as the human nature, whether or not it's human nature for people to swear, curse, no, it's not. It's learned behavior. There are many things that we have learned, and language being one of them.
But how does our culture affect the language we use?
Culture is language, language is culture. The two are intertwined. And by the way, this is a source of endless debate among philosophers of language and social linguists. If you were to go to what is called the Whorf-Sapir hypothesis, Benjamin Lee Whorf and Edward Sapir. Whorf was an anthropologist at Yale, and Sapir was a linguist. The Whorf-Sapir hypothesis is taken from the view that the two men have put together, is that language shapes our world. We are, in effect, in a sense, they wouldn't say this, I'm saying this, a prisoner of our language. That is, how we see the world is mediated by our language.
There are still substantial and meaningful attempts to keep our language clean and respectful. When we come back, we'll take a look at what some people are doing to clean up the airwaves and bring a sense of decorum back into our society.
In the late 1980s, the vice president's wife, Tipper Gore, began a campaign to put warning labels on pop music CDs to warn parents of offensive lyrics. Her efforts were met with much resistance and criticism by the music industry, which claimed it would be an infringement of the artist's right to free expression. However, those arguments were put to rest after the law was passed and warning labels became a standard part of CD packaging. Proving the music industry critics wrong, music sales did not suffer because of labeling, and artists were not prevented from using any language they wanted.
Now it's kind of passé. Now, back in the 80s, when a lot of the hardcore rap came out, with like people, Ice Cube and people like that, who were really using it a lot, it was shocking, and it got a lot of attention. But then it kind of leveled off, I think. Even people like Eminem used it a little bit, but now they've been backing away from that.
Clearly, reasonable people agree that the use of racial slurs, words designed to degrade a group of people, is not acceptable in our society. And there have been efforts recently to reverse these trends. For example, in March of 2008, a 14-year-old boy attending high school in Southern California started a club called Stop Cussing. The boy is quoted as saying that cussing makes people sound really unintelligent. The mayor of the boy's town even proclaimed the first week in March No Cussing Week in order to remind people to be more civil and elevate the level of discourse. Karl Jaskolski has strong views on the use of cursing in a professional environment. He gives us a specific example.
All of the work that I do in working with businesses is I talk about language in the workplace to try and help managers and supervisors primarily on how they should communicate with employees, whether it be through their frustrations, their demands of their employees, that it can be communicated better, where they will get more, how should I say, productivity out of the employee. There are legal liabilities that one has to watch out for, especially in working with employees. If I'm offended by the way somebody talks to me, and they constantly doing it, because in fact they know I'm offended by it, and I tell them that, look, I want you to stop communicating like this to me. I want you to stop using these swear words, because it's threatening for one, and two, it's disrespectful, and that employee continues to do it, and I tell management does nothing, then I can go ahead and file suit. As a matter of fact, that's what happened in the state of Wisconsin. Ball Foster Glass, a suit was filed against him because of an employee a female employee, and how she cursed to 2 other female employees. And they had to settle for, I believe it was $160,000. Most companies, when I did my research, I found that they would have a 1-sentence or 2-sentence statement in their employee handbook that said there's no cursing, swearing. However, whether or not it actually was implemented was not the case. That's where the policy came in, and it's a 2-page policy because of technology. It also includes email, voicemail, text messaging. In addition to, it's just not verbal communication, but nonverbal communication.
How would a company ensure a profanity-free environment?
The policy itself, when I first drafted it, the whole purpose was to have some form of documentation by an employer that the employee has been notified through their handbook, their policy, that this rude, crude, abusive, and discriminatory language will not be acceptable. Why have it in policy format is usually the question, and that's because for any type of case law or administrative law, judges will want to see that you have this document. To say that, well, I told Bobby not to curse, is not going to be acceptable. But having a policy that an employee receives, reads, and signs that they've received it as part of their handbook will hold up in any type of court of law.
I think it's a matter of a social faux pas. This person should know better than to do this. It's the equivalent of bad manners. Whether it's the social manner of, well, don't you know you're supposed to hold the door open for a lady when she, this is what a gentleman does. This is how a person behaves. You stand up to greet someone. It falls into that area of social etiquette. And it's a judgment of not so much, well, maybe it's your character. I mean, weren't you raised properly? Don't you know how to behave? It's a very important part of social etiquette. We judge people by their language. And it's not just profanity. It's use of or absence of all of the language that they use.
Would most people get a bad impression from a person who curses in the workplace?
We have now become a society where we have gotten away from the visual and how people look as far as professional dress to how they sound, that they at least sound professionally, that they're using better adjectives, that they don't have to use the rude, crude, and abusive language. So I'm finding that more businesses today are starting to set that corporate culture on how people communicate. They are not going to accept the rude, the crude, and the abusive language.
If you were speaking, you're buying a car or you're making a big ticket purchase. If the person selling you that item were using profanity, what would be your reaction? Even mild profanity. I think you would see this person as less of a professional. I would. And I would back off a little bit simply because I would view such behavior as appropriate for the situation we were in.
The language discussion should be incorporated into the education settings quite a bit because of the fact that people need to learn. I've had individuals, students, I've had listeners on radio programs that I've been on who have admitted that they need to control their cursing because it doesn't do them any good. As a matter of fact, if anything, it hinders them because of the fact people will judge you based upon how, not just you, the way you dress, but how you talk.
What parents have to do is explain to them, you can use the term bad words if you want, but I think a better thing to say to the child is, these are words that some people use. As you grow up, you'll learn more about them. But for now, you shouldn't use them because people will not think well of you if you use this kind of language.
There seems to be an almost universal agreement that cursing and the use of profanity is not appropriate, and it certainly has no place in a work environment. As our culture changes over time, our language does as well. But one thing remains the same for all of civilization is the power of language and its effect on all of us. Often we dismiss words as being just that, words. However, more often than not, we lose others' respect when we lower ourselves to using inappropriate language. In the attempt to create a more peaceful and understanding society, we need to pay more attention to what we say and how we say it. That's it for this edition of Open Forum. I'm your host, Nicole Fox. Thank you for watching the show, and please join us again next week.